Hello, everybody. This is part of the Macabre Daily crew here. I'm really excited that we're able to get together because we're representing both coasts of the United States today to talk about our favorite horror films of 2021. And I don't want to delay too much of this introduction, but I do want everyone to know who's on the call with us today. So Dana, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Dana, and I'm the retro review writer for Macabre Daily and also do the horror podcast, The Horror Files, which you can find on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Audible. And I'm also on Instagram at DeadAliveDana.
Excellent. Lowell.
Hi, I'm Lowell Greenglat. I do various and sundry stuff for Macabre Daily, including interviews, recaps, and the like. And yeah, I'm a fly-by-night kind of guy, and you can find me on Instagram at Lowell School.
Excellent. And I must just want to say, like, I'm a huge fan of Dana's podcast, so please go and check that out if you haven't, The Horror Files. And also, Lowell and I are almost neighbors at this point, based on us being in Queens. So I get to see a lot of Lowell. So I know a lot of the Macabre Daily folks are jealous we get to have our hangs. But
it's nice to know you're real, by the way.
Yeah,
not just
right?
a face on the screen. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I'm not just a bot from the Matrix Resurrections, which I won't even open that can of worms today, but that's maybe for another time. And I'm Matt Orozco. I'm a contributor to Macabre Daily. I do various amounts of things, but my real passion is around anything and all horror related. I love to do interviews, love to speak to indies, and I'm based in Queens, New York, and you can find me at Macabre Matty on Instagram. So without further delay, the focus of today is really going to be us talking about what we think are the top 5 horror films of 2021. And to set some very light ground rules here, we're going to focus on films that were released in 2021. So that means if it was on Shudder and was made in like 2020, but it was released on Shudder in 2021, that's fair game. But of course, anything that was on December 31st, 2020 or January 1st, 2022, unfortunately, those aren't going to count. But we're also going to end with, at the very end, one of our favorite first time watches that is from before 2019. So something that we just, I think a lot of horror fans would agree that you spend most of your year watching things that came out way before the current year you're in. And so it's always nice to recognize some of the movies that have long passed the release date, but still hold a special place in our hearts. So with that, Dana, let's kick it off with you. What is your first film that you want to recognize for 2021?
Well, one film that I did want to recognize was Nia DaCosta's Candyman. This year, I think there were a lot of hesitation, I think, because the original Candyman is such a beloved film in the horror community. And I really like the original Candyman. So I definitely went into the film with my own kind of like, I'm not so sure kind of reservations about it. And I have to say it's not, while not a perfect film, I think there were a lot of things that it really did right. The original one kind of dealt with themes of sort of, myth and madness and race and marginalization and class. And so I feel like it was very, it went to make its own statement about that, particularly with gentrification and sort of the kind of, I want to say the kind of corrosive nature of destiny and the importance of storytelling, particularly in Black culture. And so it was a beautiful film. There was definitely a lot of, you can see a lot of influence with, kind of giallo filmmaking and stuff like that, with the use of some of these wide shots and the color palette and stuff like that. And it was, while not my favorite, I think there was a lot of really interesting things that it did. And I enjoyed it.
I would totally agree. I don't know about you, Lo. I think we've talked about this on one-on-one, but it definitely wasn't a perfect film, but it also felt like it was advancing the mythos in a really strong way. And I couldn't agree more with your sentiments around, this the discussion around the corrosiveness of mythology and how that persists, but also under the context of race and being, you know, how the marginalization of particularly Black people in that film caused this kind of almost retribution through mythology.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, excuse me, I didn't pick it in by 5, but I'd say it would definitely be in my 10. It was like a fascinating legacy sequel. And it kind of puts a new spin on the original if you watch it after you watch the remake, but it doesn't take anything away from it. And I mean, it was just well executed all the way around. I mean, the opening sequence, which is even like a reverse of like the original's opening sequence. It's like there's a lot of call and response to that original, and I really liked it. I could have used like it could have been longer. Like I feel like it almost like without any spoilers, it almost ended like right before what could have been a third act. Like it's not a long movie, but I would have watched another 20 minutes like easily. But it was really good.
I agree with that because I think it was starting to kind of hit something there towards the end, and I would have liked to have seen. I think there was a kind of a missed opportunity for a deeper exploration of that. But you know, I think that having that burden of the original film, you know, on DaCosta's shoulders couldn't have been easy. So I think, you know, taking that into consideration, she did a solid job of it.
Yeah. Seldom do we ever say a movie should be longer these days, and I could not agree more. So
for real.
So Lowell, what about you? What's your first film for top 5 of 2021?
Well, even though I said Candyman would be in the back half of my 10, I don't have any specific order for these. These are just like my favorites, but I'm gonna point out kind of, I guess, a controversial pick, Last Night in Soho, which I really liked. I really enjoyed. I love Edgar Wright, and this didn't quite feel like a typical Edgar Wright film, but it was still great. Just great performances, great soundtrack, cinematography is very lush, and I'm not going to ruin anything, but I know a lot of people were upset about a twist towards the end, but I thought it fit completely. Like, and it even reminded me a little bit of the new Candyman, but I just thought it was just a great experience and like a really cool, frightening journey to be on. It really is, like, after years of Edgar Wright like throwing bits of giallo into his movies, this is like his giallo, and it was cool to see that.
This is one I didn't see. I was trying to catch this before this recording, but unfortunately, I didn't want to spend like $100 on like 3 movies that are still in like pre-release. I mean, listen, I will support the hell out of VOD right now, but I had kind of hit my budget for as much as the purchasing films had gone. And I wish I could have taken some of those purchases back to go towards something like Last Night in Soho, but I haven't seen this one personally yet.
Yeah, same for me, because this is actually one I do want to sit down and watch. It's one of those ones where I want to wait and watch it so that I can give it the attention I feel like it deserves, because I have been hearing a lot of positive things about it, particularly a lot of the performances in it. So yeah, it's still sadly on my to watch list, and hoping to, you know, remedy that very, very soon. But yeah, I've heard you know, really like more positive than negative about it, and especially with the direction and how the film looks. And yeah,
it's good. It lives up to its promise, I'd say.
Hopefully we can all get a chance to watch it. I think it comes out on Blu-ray 4K next week. So that's usually when I tend to like really dig in. If something I missed, you know, I will buy the Blu-ray 4K, and I kind of implicitly trust certain directors like Edgar Wright. So even if I don't love it, I'm still going to buy it, you know. But all right, I'm similar to Lowell in that I don't have an order to these. These are just, you know, top 5, the ones that I really enjoyed. Candyman's definitely on my list as far as the top 10 goes. But I did want to call out one that I rewatched recently, which is Caveat on Shudder. And I had to go back and rewatch this before the recording, because I remembered really liking something, but I feel like we watched so well. I'm going to speak for myself, but I think there might be some nodding heads amongst you both, and also people listening and watching this. Is that you watch so many movies that you almost kind of forget sometimes some of the ones that you liked, and very often it's difficult, I think, for films to really stick with you, unless it's something you were really looking forward to. So, like Candyman, like I remember specific scenes really well because I was so excited for it that it almost burns that memory in your brain. But I think Caveat, and particularly Shudder, you're going to notice, spoiler on my list, there's quite a few Shudder releases because I think they just knocked it out of the park and they just keep getting better and better every year. But without going into too much, Caveat really is just a very simple setup of someone who's being offered to go watch someone's niece who has what he terms as psychological problems. And once he gets there, he realizes that there is a bit of a caveat to his, for lack of a better term, to the arrangement, where he has to be essentially strapped into this harness. And he cannot, because the person he's watching doesn't want anyone to be in their room. And again, I think I could go into more, but it almost is going to spoil it. And while, like many horror films, it doesn't always stick everything it's trying to do, because it does do a lot, and it also really doesn't necessarily tie up all of the knots or untie all the knots it creates. But what it does have in spades is atmosphere. And there are some truly terrifying moments in it that will stick with you, particularly the visuals of some of the things you're going to see and just the way the narrative plays out. And it's a very small film. It takes place literally within this house. There's maybe 4 cast members, I think, in total. But with very little, I think you can sometimes get a lot. And so Caveat for me just totally blew my mind. It's something I'm going to go back to. And even my wife was walking in when I was watching a time. She's like, I'm going to cover my eyes for this part because it just looks like it's too scary.
Yeah, Caveat's one that that's also on my list as well. I think the concept is very fascinating. I really like the idea of I love horror films where there's some sort of element of like there's something off about, there's like an arrangement here, or somebody's going in to do a job, and we're not quite sure of like the full scope of what this is going to actually entail. And that really kind of presents an element of danger and, uncertainty and stuff. And I really like that sort of aspect to the plot about this. And it's one, I agree with you about Shudder. They've really been doing some really great work this year with the films that they've been releasing. And that's one that's definitely at the top of my list to watch because nobody is wanting to spoil anything about it from what I've heard. And so that makes me even more intrigued. I'm like, okay, I have to watch this because nobody wants to say, they don't want to give too much away about it, which I like. As opposed to the new Scream film coming out, I'm sure.
Oh my God.
No. Just blinders until next week.
I'm gonna have to stay off of Instagram that whole week.
Yeah. Thanks certain sites for already coming out and telling me. Like Variety had something like, it's the best one since the original. Like, I don't want to hear that. I just want to go into a movie and enjoy it. But that's, again, I will stack the soapboxes real high on that one. So,
and I mean, how much do you think like the hype around the new Scream, or 5 Cream, as some people are calling it, equals like the hype around Scream 4 that came out 10 years ago? I feel like a lot of people are just cutting and pasting things that they said about that before it's even out. But that's another rabbit hole. But I like Caveat too. I don't remember much about it except that I like it because, as we were saying before, as Matt said, you see a lot, and stuff that you see earlier in the year, you kind of, it goes to the wayside and you sort of think about stuff you saw later, which is, I mean, that's why I use Letterboxd, honestly, because like it's just a list of all the movies that I saw a trailer for or I know is coming out soon. It's like, oh, I have to see that. So I'm sure it's on my Letterboxd somewhere, and I like vaguely remember things I liked about it, but I can't tell you how it ends or anything like that.
Probably a little bit of pandemic brain too.
yeah, it's absolutely what it is.
All right, Dana, what's next on your list?
Next on my list, of course, in no particular order, I have to I think it's one that probably not a lot of people watch. It was a very, independent horror film that came out, but Death Drop Gorgeous, I thought was so much fun. I was very lucky to interview one of the directors, Chris Dalfie, for it. And it came out, I think, in September of 2021. But in any case, I love this movie because it's sort of the kind of like gritty, it has a very gritty John Waters with infinitely more gore to it, which I'm here for. And it was really definitely a passion project. They shot it like at nights and on weekends, and with using friends and people that they just in the art community in Providence, Rhode Island. And they really made something that's, while extremely rough around the edges, is a lot of fun and surprisingly has a lot of heart to it. Even though there's some, there's a scene with a meat grinder and a appendage. So that's all I'll say about that. But despite having scenes like that, it has a lot of heart and is a lot of fun. You can tell everybody on this was just having a great time. They actually managed to get Leanna Quigley do a cameo in it. I guess because they just had dinner with her and they're like, hey, can you go and like basically shoot this like right after we leave dinner? And she was like, okay. And so it was a lot of fun. It really explores kind of I think drag culture in a very different way. It kind of explored I think a lot of drag culture, at least in how we see it in popular society, is like RuPaul's Drag Race and just sort of very camp and sort of extra and out there and blah blah blah. But it sort of explores like kind of the cruel nature of also being a drag performer. There's obnoxious audience members, there's really horrible and unscrupulous club owners, and even with dealing with personalities of like fellow drag performers. So I really thought they captured another side to that culture that I don't think a lot of people have seen, and the nature of aging and youth also in that culture. So I just thought they did a really great job with it. And I definitely one I would recommend.
This is a new one to me. And is it something that's on like on video on demand now? Is that the best way to see it?
I believe so. Yeah. It's I believe it's on video on demand.
Great. I'm got notes over platforms. Here. Because I always love hearing new recommendations, but you've sold me on the concept of just kind of I always like films that focus on, different subcultures within our society. I think Knife Plus Heart a few years ago really did a great job of bringing this kind of giallo, but also under the lens of trans and the gay and gay kind of gay culture overall. And it's just outstanding. One of my favorite movies of the past 10 years for sure. So anything that just explores another point of view is always something I'm going to give a shot at, for sure.
Yeah, it's actually I just checked, it's on YouTube, it's on Google Play, Amazon Prime, Vudu. So yeah, I definitely would recommend.
All right, Lowell, what about you? What's your fourth?
I'm going to go, and I can already hear the groans, but I enjoyed the hell out of it. It knows exactly what it wants to be, and it achieves that. I'm going with Malignant. I know, but listen, I the same thing with Last Night in Soho. I feel like most of the major or even like popular horror movies that came out this year, people like either loved it or hated it, and it seemed like the hatred is so strong, which I don't understand, because the movie knows what it is, and it's like, and it clearly tells you what it is. It's just a ridiculous, somewhat grounded in reality, except for a few parts, movie. And Matt, you and I talked about this, but like, this is the movie that James Wan gets to make after two Conjurings and Aquaman. This is him like cashing in his chit, and it's great. It's just, it's so nuts. I mean, in the beginning, and like even there's another scene where someone's like driving up like this really beautiful like coastal highway, and then you see like a mansion hanging over a cliff, and it's like an insane asylum, and it's like, oh, this is what this movie is. And it doubles down on that so many times. And there's a scene towards the end where a character enters a room full of women who you think are in costume, but they're, I guess, not, because the movie is suddenly deciding that it's a nexus point of timelines. And you see that one of the seemingly random characters in that room is Zoe Bell, and you just know that shit is about to go down, and it does so hard. And it was just a joy. I loved it.
I totally agree with you, Lowell. And I know we're not, ranking in this one. Malignant was my favorite of this year. I loved how he absolutely leaned into the insanity of what he was doing, and in a way that I really felt as has kind of been lost in horror films and the past few years. And this was just, it's a total flex from Juan. It's like, okay, I'll do your third Conjuring film, I'll do your Aquaman, and I'll make you a shit ton of money doing it, but I want to go and do my insanity over here now with $40 million. And that's exactly what he did. And I absolutely loved it, because it's just I don't think it was something anybody really expected. It's campy, it's bizarre, it just throws a lot of references in there that you're just kind of like, holy crap. Like every time you kind of see it, or you catch, or you pick up on something, it's just like, oh my God. I watched this film sitting down with my husband, who hated it, by the way. And we were watching it together, and I'm literally on the edge of the couch like a little kid, like gleefully clapping and laughing, and just like, you're right, it's an absolute joy. It's it knows exactly what it's doing. And it makes me excited for James Wan films again. It just like I was kind of reluctant to be like, all right, I don't know about this. He says it's his take on Giallo, but I'm like, it just looked, I thought it was going to just be like another Conjuring film, and it ended up really just kind of flipping my whole perspective of it. And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, he didn't even do the third Conjuring. I think they asked him
he
to.
produced it, didn't he?
Yeah, but he didn't direct it like he did the first two, so he can work on this. And it totally shows. And there's the trailers kind of set it up so that you think it's going to be a certain kind of movie, but then there's a reveal about halfway through, and I'm like, oh, please don't let it be what I think it is. Please don't let it be what I think it is. And it wasn't, and it was something totally crazier and so much more original. And I was like, oh yes, we're in good hands.
I give credit where credit's due. I think James,
that's a great way to start, man.
no, I will always say that, like, I really appreciate that James Wan made a movie that is essentially a movie he wanted to make. And I think part of I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. It wasn't like I'm not maligning Malignant, but I'm just saying, like, it was not.
It is okay to malign Malignant. You're safe here. It's fine.
And I get both sides of it. I really do see why people love it. I also see why people don't love it. And I think one of the reasons it doesn't really connect with me as strong as I think it does with others is because I'm not trying to play like a call to the ending kind of thing, but like I knew where this was going. And it's because I think I've seen so many of the movies James Wan was pulling from to make this, particularly having seen Evil Dead Trap this year and realizing, holy shit, like and again, I don't want to say that he's taking that, but if you go watch Evil Dead Trap and then watch Malignant, I think you'll see that there's a pretty significant connection between those two movies, and there's a pretty significant year gap between them. Now, that said, I do love that he pretty much gave WB the finger. And I think WB of all of just really took it this year from their artists, because they had a lot of really big budget films that just came out and said, yeah, fuck you, studio. Like, we're going to make the movie we want to make. And I love that. I will always support that. And I also think, had I seen Malignant in a theater, I probably would have had a different experience with it. I think HBO Max is somewhat of a blessing and a burden to the viewing experience, because it almost commoditizes art, and particularly things like Malignant that are pushing the envelope. It's not doing something wildly different. It's just doing it in a way that a lot of people probably haven't seen before, or haven't seen in a long time. So I think the HBO Max experience and the straight to streaming stuff is a good way for people to get access, because I think it had a great viewing on HBO Max. Like, I think it hit a lot of numbers. But then again, every time they release a big budget film on HBO Max, it also does the same thing. It's like Netflix. They keep breaking their own records because people need more to watch. So I'm going to give it another shot. I'm not going to throw it out quite yet. And I will always support someone like James Wan doing something like this. At the same time, I was kind of like, I left it a little bit cold, but I'm one person. My opinion means fuck all in the grand scheme of things. So I get the love for it as much as I get the hate. And to that end, I think I'm going to go with, for my next pick, one that actually Lowell had suggested to me. And I didn't really think I was going to enjoy it, largely because I think a lot of these films weren't really promoted that well. Like Malignant's a good example of something that really could have used a better promotional campaign. But maybe WB saw it and was like, we really don't want to remember we gave you money to do this. Like, I think it was like $40 million too. So it wasn't like wasn't chunk change. But The Deep House is my fourth pick. And what I loved about this, and again, I don't want to go into spoiler territory, just simply to say, like, it's so French in the way that it treats its characters. And the whole underwater haunted house thing, like, I'm going to call it novel simply because I don't think I've seen that before. Like, I think we've seen underwater horror. I think we've seen haunted house, but I don't think we've seen it in this way. And I think, I was even curious how they filmed this, just because it's, as we all know from films that have been made on the water, they almost never go well. Lowell and I talked about this a week ago or so. Like, sometimes you get Jaws, but sometimes, you get the Meg, right? and so The Deep House, like, it genuinely, and it does something that I wish more horror movies did. It went there. It teed up something really pretty gruesome and pretty dark and sinister, and it went there with it. And I love that it did that. It was a tight film. It was less than 90 minutes, which is like my sweet spot. And so I really think that it did something, again, I didn't blow the doors off of anything necessarily, but sometimes, like a good recipe, anyone can make, anyone can make breakfast, but not everyone makes the best breakfast. If you really know how to make your eggs, your toast, whatever it is you're having, like, making it just right is a testament to quality as much as it is to try something that's totally out there. So I really give a lot of credit to that. And I loved, just the experience. It's something I'll definitely go back to. It's something I definitely want to show other people. And I think it's open. It's broad enough in its horror where it doesn't feel like it's made just for horror fans, but there's enough, kind of meat there to satisfy our bloodlust as fans, but it also can appeal to a much wider audience.
Yeah, I mean, this was in my top 5 also. I loved it. And I interviewed Julien Maury and Alexander Bustillo, I hope I'm saying that right, shortly after, and I got to talk to him about it, which was really cool. I mean, I'm a huge fan of theirs. Anything that they come out with, I'll watch. And, they also released Candisha, which came out on Shudder this year, which I thought was pretty good. But I love that, like, they're so very much themselves, but they are themselves in different genres. Like, Inside is a totally different movie than this versus, Leatherface or Candisha. I mean, they're just killing it. And I mean, this movie in particular, it's like a magic trick. It's like, I cannot believe that no one's thought about doing this before, that they're pulling it off, and that most of the movie takes place, underneath, like, in an underwater environment where the dialogue is ADR'd. And, like, you're discovering things along with the characters. And, from a technical standpoint, you're like, how do they do this? But it's also like, what are they going to find down there? Like, what's the horror going to come from? Is this suddenly going to turn into, like, a crawl situation with, like, an aquatic beast? And, like, they still fit in some of that good old fashioned French extremity nihilism, which is very impressive. I was blown away by this.
Yeah, it sort of reminded, it reminded me of like Superhost, but underwater. But I really like, this was one of my top 5 too, because I really like, I love the sort of haunted house genre. And so they really do kind of play up that kind of aspect, and the the movie kind of makes use of all the like eerie sort of underwater kind of spectral elements, which, probably could have come off as, maybe clumsy and tacky, but were actually pretty scary. And because it's kind of weirdly frightening to like watch a ghost, go through the water, like to watch them swim. I mean, if you can pull off like a fish jump scare, I think that's pretty good.
That got me. That fish got me good. And it riffed on a movie that I love to death, which is The Beyond. It definitely had Fulci vibes through it.
Oh, yeah.
There's a part where there's one of the ghosts is walking, and holy shit, like my skin just crawled a little bit, because the way it's done is just so masterful. And I actually have Candisha on my top 10, because that was another one that I just thought really nailed it. I'm not going to put it on my top 5 because I want to spread the love across creators. But Deep House just,
it's good.
Yeah, Deep House was so just chef's kiss. Well, Dana, what's your next one?
Well, my next one is actually Censor. I like this film a lot. I was sort of I kind of was not going into it with really super high expectations, but what I really enjoyed about it is that it's kind of like, it's a fascinating movie to watch, because as horror movie lovers, we're kind of watching these films for sort of the thrill and excitement of these kinds of creative kills and gore. And so to watch somebody who's a video nasty censor, watching these films from like a very analytical standpoint, like with literally a checklist, is kind of interesting to see. It's sort of cataloging what we just sort of basically take in. We're not some people, we definitely count kills and stuff like that. I mean, you go on any like YouTube video and it's like kill count, all that kind of stuff. But for purely reasons like there's one too many of these scenes, or there's and it's fascinating to me that this all happened, and the methodical nature of how it happened was really interesting. And I think what really Censor did well was it was kind of about repression in all forms, whether it's the content of horror films, music, whether it's internal repression that, trauma as the main character has kind of gone through. The main character of Enid, we're really in a way is kind of a video nasty herself, because her story is very traumatic and horrific, and that suppression of pain and horror leads to very other horrific acts, which I won't go into. But it's a beautiful film, and with really just this ominous feel behind the whole thing, and just kind of like seeing everything just start to unravel in a way that sort of leads to a lot of people were kind of, the ending is kind of, a lot of people were sort of like, what the hell does this mean? And I don't know. I think it's a film that's definitely leaves that for interpretation, but I really like the film, and I'm excited to see, more of that kind of thing, and horror movies that come out.
It reminded me a lot of a couple movies, or like Cigarette Burns, the Masters of Horror episode from John Carpenter, I think is the most direct one. But also there's is it Scandinavian, Evil Ed from like the 90s. Although it's much less campy and much more serious than Evil Ed takes itself. But this one didn't make my list, but it is one I want to go back and revisit, largely because I think it did have visually something going for it. And I love that it focused on a period of time that I think as horror fans who go, gonzo for the history, we're all, and we're all based in North America. So we don't have the video nasty as a kind of part of our own film history, but I think I would speak for all of us in saying that we know what it is. And I think that it's really unique that it takes place during that time, because you just don't see a lot of niche period films like that. So definitely something I want to go back and revisit. And I know Vinegar Syndrome and put out a pretty great release of it, or one of their partner labels, but also in the UK, I think one of our colleagues, Rich, did a review of the second sight release.
Yeah.
Have you seen this one, Lowell?
Yeah, I liked it. It wasn't in my top 10, but I did enjoy it. I got Videodrome vibes from it a little bit, at least in like tone and structure. But yeah, it was cool. And I can't wait to see, what is it, Prano Bailey Bond, I think her name is. I can't wait to see what else she does. It was cool.
Right on. Well, what's your next film up, Lowell?
I'm gonna go with something a little more mainstream, but I really enjoyed it. I was really impressed by it. It felt like it was a breezy 90 minutes, but I don't know how long it really was, which is an achievement of itself, and that's A Quiet Place 2, which I actually thought it was better than the original. It's an expansion of the world, and I mean, you think about it, and like, how do you add characters and like a sense of scope to something that was like the original was so small and intimate, and this was an expansion on it. It was just really well done, really well put together. Maybe a plot hole or two, but that's fine. And I remember I'm on the edge of my seat at the ending, and then it ends, and I was like, oh, that's it? And then I'm like, no, that's it. Yeah, that's fine. And there could be a part 3, but there doesn't have to be at all, which is also the kind of feeling that I got at the end of the first one. So I sort of like, I liked where it was going. I liked the continuation of it. And it was just an impressive ride all around.
I rated this one really high, but it didn't make my top 10 list. And I think a lot of that comes from, it was the first movie I saw in the theaters since the pandemic started. And I didn't see the first one in the theater. So I think that kind of creates an experience because of the nature of the film itself. But I got to hand it to, Krasinski for creating some absolutely mega tension. Like I sometimes keep track of when I ball my fists when I'm watching movies, and there's some parts in there I was like, oh my goodness. Like it was almost like Last of Us kind of like tension, where I was like, what is going to happen? Even though it hit some very familiar beats. And I agree. I liked it more than the first one, no question.
Yeah, I agree. This didn't make my top, but I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it more than the first one, actually. I agree, because they really expanded the world, I think, in a smart way. And I have to say the addition of Cillian Murphy was an ace in the hole. He really, I think he brought more to a lot to a character that could have really just been like a throwaway. I think he made that film in a lot of ways for me. I really I think definitely like the opening scene was pretty. I was kind of like, I watched it with reluctance at first, because I wasn't a huge fan of the first one. And but that opening scene, I'm just kind of like, all right, I'm in. I was in by that point. So I thought it was really solid. And yeah, you're right. I think it's one of those ones where it's like, it's fine if it's done after this, because I think it ended like, okay, yeah, this is like, it's done its job, and it did it really well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree on those points as well. It did what it needed to do. And hopefully, I'm sure they'll make another one, because it's Hollywood, and they got to make that money. But I think for my next one, I want to go to one that came out like right at the beginning of the year, which is Wrong Turn. And having done a watch of the entire Wrong Turn series, which Lowell advised me not to do it, and for my own mental health, I probably shouldn't have. You did, and you know what? Yeah. I did, like any horror movie fan, I disregarded all the warnings, went ahead regardless. I went to Camp Crystal Lake, even though the guy told me not to. But I really think, like, in rewatching the Wrong Turn series, the first one still stands out to me as probably the best example of a Texas Chainsaw Massacre riff, you know, that kind of stands on its own, but still pays homage and also incorporates a lot of, you know, the Hills Have Eyes kind of stuff as well. But it still slaps, you know, like it still works. And so having watched all those sequels and then kind of going back to that same well until it runs so dry that we're pretty much just pulling up dirt by the end of it all, I was really pretty, I want to say it's usually at lowered expectations is not very common for me, but I went into the Wrong Turn film thinking this cannot possibly be good. Because one, it almost came out of nowhere. Two, it really didn't seem to have any sort of promotional material to let me know what it's even about. And three, like, it's been a long time since the last one, you know, are we going back to the same well, or are we doing something different? And I think, you know, again, we're removing spoilers from this component, but the approach that they take, the only gripe I have is it runs a little long because it feels like two different movies. And I think that's largely due to editing and pacing. Like, I think they do a really good job of trying to squeeze a lot into it, but I also would have loved this, like, if it was 30 minutes shorter and just focused on one component rather than, you know, they had two kind of storylines going against. Even though they converge at the end, I think that their core line, like the core story at the beginning around, the, you know, person getting lost, like the group getting lost in the woods, kind of that central theme that's core to the first, is really important. But also the bait and switch they do, and that's the best part about it for me, is they make you start to question who are the good and the bad people in this scenario. And I think that's something the first Wrong Turn gives you on a plate. It's like, well, you know who to root for, you know who to not root for. But in this one, it makes you ask, who's right here? And I think they did that really, really well. There are some absolutely harrowing scenes too, like some, as far as violence goes, like some of the crunchiest violence I've seen this year. So definitely worth the check out. And you know, Matthew Modine's still working, so good for him.
Amen. Yeah. I'm curious, like, did you, with the final scene, I won't get into it, but it plays out kind of under the closing credits. Do you think that this was always the intended finale, or do you think it was like added after the fact?
That's a good question.
You mean specifically the playing over the end credits, or just like the whole?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think the last scene prior to the credits was definitely part of the script, but
yeah,
I don't know. But I loved
I just
it.
said that's what watching it, that just kind of stuck out in my head. I just wondered if that was something deliberate, or if it was just sort of like, you know, maybe an afterthought to kind of, you know.
I don't know. I mean, it is technically all done like in one take. So I think maybe they had the idea to do it in one take, and then they're like, well, let's just put it over the credits. But yeah, that's a good question.
I think the film overall does struggle with kind of how to present itself well. Like, again, I think it does, like the way it switches between the storylines and the kind of shoehorning in of the ending, it does feel a bit shoehorned. I don't know. I think it was probably filmed, and I think it was probably an editing decision to, like, we filmed this, we want to use it. You know, I kind of feel similarly about Haunt. You know, it's like, did we need that? You know, like it's really great.
I liked it, but
I liked it, but at the same time, I think horror one of the best things about horror and one of the worst things about horror can be ambiguity. And sometimes ambiguity can be an extremely powerful tool to let the fear and the horror resonate and really stick with you. But at the same time, you know, giving people closure, particularly in the times we live in where, you know, there's not a lot of really good news happening. I think sometimes we want that catharsis of release and closure. So, you know, I'd have to go back and rewatch it, because it has been since the beginning of the year since I watched it. So just to see, like, how do I feel about the ending? But overall, I think despite all of that, I still think it handled the core themes that it was going for really well. And again, horror movies that make you think just a little bit, that go beyond pure entertainment, I think deserve recognition, and especially ones that really, I think, didn't have much going for it based on just the franchise that it's building off of alone. I hope they don't make another. I will say that. I do not think this sets itself up for a sequel. I don't think this is a franchisable entry. I think standalone, it just works. But that's a good call out, Dana. I think definitely something people should think about.
Well, I think one of the things that it really had going for it was that it is kind of hard to peg, you know. I mean, it kind of, it's sort of like weirdly like a kind of very gory contemporary Western set in a forest, you know. It's like, how do you categorize that? You know, it's sort of like, I kind of like the fact that it's you can't really nail it down to one specific thing.
Yeah,
I loved it. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, you go.
Oh, sorry, I had to grab the door before. It's in my 10, but it didn't make my top 5, but I loved it. Honestly, I don't think they even should have called it Wrong Turn. Like, call it something else. But yeah, it's nasty and gnarly and like, yeah, I mean, I'm fine if they never make another one of these, but the world it's created or even just glanced at is just so fascinating. Like, I don't know if I'd want to spend more time with those people, but it's just so interesting that it's like they're not wholly evil. It's just like, this is what they believe, and it's barbaric, but they do it. And like, and I mean, it could have gone wrong in so many ways because it's like, it's almost like 3 movies like squeezed into one. And you can almost hear someone going, now what if we like ended here and we saved this for the sequel? And the writer's like, no, we don't know if we're getting another one of these, just put it all in there. And it's great. I like many horror franchises. I would watch another one, but yeah, maybe it should just let it lie. And it's so brutal. But yeah.
All right, Dana, what's your number 2?
My next one actually is Slumber Party Massacre. So the remake or whatever reimagining you'd like to call it. I really am a fan of the 1982. And you know, I think it's I think a lot of people who, when they see the original, are like, this is directed by a woman. You know, it's sort of like there's gratuitous nudity and it's so silly and campy and everything. And I think that's why I love it so much. But I really, you know, I was very reluctant. I kind of was like, oh my gosh, okay, they're gonna, you know, remake another remake, you know, and that kind of thing. So but I feel like it's more it's definitely a love letter to the original that kind of very cleverly, you know, kind of tackles the sexist tropes of horror and really you know, kind of turns the whole like thing on its head by having women who, you know, fight back. Like they basically turn the you know, tide on the bad guy. And so yeah, it's I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. It was great. I thought everybody was great in it. And I think it did a good job of sort of treading the line between you know, horror and comedy and tackling those gender stereotypes that are so common. And you know, it can sometimes be a little on the nose, kind of like almost breaking the fourth wall kind of thing. But it's like, if you sit down and watch it for what it is, and just that I intend to have a good time and have it be fun, then I think it's really enjoyable and a lot of fun.
I wrote this one down because I think I love doing these recaps because it always reminds me of movies I've missed. And I remember this coming out and I just was like, oh, I would love to check that out. I saw good reviews, but it just totally flew by me and kind of out of sight, out of mind. So this is something I definitely want to check out because I agree with you. The original is so good. And the fact that, I mean, the directed by a woman thing works so well because then it's got layers like an onion, right? It's the Shrek of horror films. It's like, wait, on its face, it's a slasher that's totally just exactly what it wants to be, but then you unpack what really is beneath that, and it's like, wow, there's a lot of really great humor here that's intended, but also can be totally missed, and you can still have a good time with. So I definitely want to check this one out, and thank you for mentioning it.
And it's, I tell you, that runtime, it's like 86 minutes.
Oof.
And
In
yet
and
it
out.
manages to throw in like a lot of twists and turns. And so I, for one, I wasn't bored. I wasn't, it does keep you on your toes a little bit. The kills are really fun. And there's some good little, some good gory ones in there too. So it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
I liked it. It didn't make my top 10, but I did really enjoy it. And I think it definitely has one of the best reveals of the year that I won't get into, but like it made me howl in a great, great way. And yeah, I was also hesitant going into it because I'm like, this is a Sci-Fi Channel movie of a remake of Slumber Party Massacre. Like, come on. But like, it was like, yeah, just lean, mean, great kills, and just knows exactly, another one that knows exactly what it wants to do and does it at the Sci-Fi Channel. Who knew?
I want to hear you howl, Lowell. I'm just saying, like at some point, I want to be in the room when this experience happens. But
more like a guffaw. It was more like a guffaw where I'm like, okay, this movie knows what this is what it's going to be. Awesome. I'm all in.
Excellent. Well, what's your number 2 pick, Lowell?
Well, I mean, I guess it would have been the Deep House, because I just have one more on my list. I can do math, I swear. But the last one that we haven't talked about yet on my list is The Night House by David Bruckner, and written by Ben Collins and Luke Pidorowski. I think maybe I'm just thinking Jodorowsky, but it kind of came and went. I wonder if maybe it would be a little more popular if we weren't still in a pandemic. But it's just this sort of haunting examination of grief. Rebecca Hall, who's fantastic in it, plays a recently widowed woman. Her husband recently killed himself, and no one knows why. She doesn't know why. And then, of course, she notices strange things around her house and starts realizing that he kept some secrets. And they live on like a beautiful lake. And she starts seeing that there's another house that looks kind of like hers from across the lake. And, she's wondering what's happening, what could it be? And I don't want to get too much into it, but it's one of those, like, you're watching it and you're like, all right, where is this going? And then by the end, it's like, oh wow. And I wasn't expecting it to be on my top 5 or 10 even, but like I really liked it. And the fact that David Bruckner and Ben Collins and Luke Pidorowski are also writing one of the 10,000 Hellraiser projects that I guess we're getting coming out, but they're doing the reboot for Hulu. And this, I don't want to set expectations that it's like a gory, fresco like Hellraiser was, but I'm really excited to see what Hellraiser we're going to get from the people who made this movie. It was a very satisfying rabbit hole to go down.
This was another it was another one of those, it still hasn't hit the cheap rental yet, so I passed on it, but it's definitely on my list to check out, because whenever a colleague like one of you all recommends something, I definitely will put it to the top of the list. So I look forward to checking it out, and I'll watch anything Hellraiser. I did a Hellraiser watch of the series. I don't recommend anyone do that. It's not good for you.
But did you do all of the direct-to-video sequels, or did you stop after 4 like a smart person?
No, I did all of them, but what I did, because I knew they were going to get worse, is I started with the 5th one and then watched all of the back half, and then went back and then watched 1, 2, 3, 4 at the end of my watch. So that way I know I could end on a high note. Because those to me are like, the first 4 films are just, they're some of my favorite franchise films of all time. But it's time for someone to take a stab at it. And I love that they cast, what's her name? Jamie
Clayton, I think.
Jamie Clayton. Yeah, I think she's going to do great. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. I actually, this was actually in not my top 5, but my top 10. But I think, a movie like this is only as strong as its main protagonist, and everything is on Rebecca Hall's shoulders for this film, and she absolutely just nails it. It reminded me a little bit of like Nicole Kidman and The Others, you know, a little bit of that, and she just does so well, just kind of blending, you know, anger and grief and confusion and sort of what it's like to be kind of left behind when somebody, you know, commits such a horrific act and such a selfish act. And you know, she's such a great performer. I like watching her in pretty much anything, and she does, you know, she doesn't let the you know, the outside of the film, the spookiness or the, you know, she doesn't let all of that do the work. She really connects with the feelings and the character driven emotions at the center of it. And I think that's what really makes it kind of, you know, stand out. She's not just reacting to things, you know, she's really doing a lot of great character work in it. And yeah, I think she's great in it.
I'm going to put that on my list of things I've got 3 now that I've got to watch over the next week, so I can think about them a little further. And I think for my second one here, it's one that I think is going to come as no surprise to anyone that has watched or read the site and watched my Instagram for the past few months, but it's Black Friday. I love this movie. I cannot sing its praises enough. The creative team behind it's been amazingly generous with their time to talk about it. But I don't even want to rehash so much of what I said before. For me, it's like comfort food. It's a perfectly good example. I think we talked about this earlier with another film that just does exactly what it's supposed to do really well. And I think the humor really connects. I worked at retail, so I have been in that syndicate, and I've been in on Black Friday. I've worked in a mall, and I think that the ensemble cast really just nailed it too. You know, it's more, I'd say it's a really good blend of horror comedy, which I've always said is very difficult to do. I think you either end up being one more than the other. Like I saw Werewolves Within this year, which I really enjoyed, but I think it's more of a comedy, really, and it doesn't do as much of the horror, whereas Black Friday really just does give you these gooey effects from Robert Kurtzman, and then at the same time gives you these outstanding performances. And there's some touching moments in there that, again, could come off as like, you know, that's a bit corny, but at the same time, if you're buying into the world, it really resonates in a way that I think makes you feel like, yeah, these could be real people. And in fact, they are based on people that the writer, you know, Andy Grzykowiak actually worked with. But it has a couple of my favorite scenes of the year. One is involving a forklift, and the other is involving a character who will live forever in my mind as Dower Dennis. Just the best. Like, I would love a Dower Dennis plush doll. And just to say the things that it says, it comes at the perfect right time with the right levity. And again, it doesn't take itself seriously. It doesn't give itself, you know, it doesn't try and make you feel when you're not supposed to. So I think Black Friday was just an absolute hit for me.
I agree. This was my last one in the in the my top. This was just so much fun to go into, and it came out at the right time, of course. And I totally, it just looked like it was so much fun to like make. And, you know, just as much as it's like to sit down and watch it, which I always like seeing, because you know, to see that if you feel like the people who are in it are having a good time making it, I think that helps with the enjoyment of it. And that's just what it looked like to me. And yeah, I think they're missing a merchandising opportunity with that doll. Holy cow. I love that. And I think that, and I love seeing, I love seeing Bruce Campbell in that role. That's like, so kind of like, you know, we all know a guy like that. And I think he just did such a great job with it. And I think this year is like, holy cow, it's Devon Sawa's year. He did Chucky, he did this. You know, he's only got more coming out, and I love seeing him in horror films. He does such a great job, and just like really consistent. And I think his plot line could have been like that, you know, cheesy, like kind of tacked on sort of thing, but it wasn't. It was actually he made it very approachable and emotionally resonant without being like sickly, or anything like that. So, and it was just so much fun to watch. I love horror comedies, and you're right. Horror comedies are a difficult balance because it's really hard to get them right, because you go too much one way and you lose all the horror people. You go too much this way, you lose the comedy people. So, but I thought they really, really nailed it with this one.
I remember I liked it. It didn't make my 10, but I don't remember much from it. I feel like I need to watch it again. But yeah, I feel like this, Matt, is like your Anna in the Apocalypse to me, because I love Anna in the Apocalypse so much. I sing its praises. I tell horror fans, even musical fans everywhere, like, you gotta see this. I'm just like spreading the gospel everywhere. But like Matt, I know it's not like your favorite.
I'm gonna give it another shot. You've convinced me that
I'll give another shot to Black Friday.
Well, I don't know if either of you have one more to go off of for 2021. I do, but again, don't feel forced to if you do. But I want to open it up to you all first before I dive into my last one.
I think we covered my 2021, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, last one on my list is VHS 94. And this rocked my fucking world. Like, I admit that I only saw the first 2 VHS films, and I love the second. I think we can all, well, again, I'm going to generalize, but the second one has probably one of the best anthology stories of all time, from Timo. Or is it Gareth Evans? It's Gareth Evans who did that one.
Isn't it both of them?
Maybe.
Gareth Evans was definitely on it, but I think he co-directed with Timo.
I mean, it's just an absolute banger. And like, I think it also, like, if you get one good story in an anthology, that's a win. But if you get more than one, and to me, VHS 94, like, Lowell, you said you guffawed at Slumber Party Massacre, and like I mean, sometimes I will vocalize how I'm feeling when a movie does something, and with VHS 94, I was like, fucking kidding me. Like, I actually said that out loud. Like the Ratma like story, like
oh my God. Yeah.
I mean, everything about it just worked, and I don't think there was a weak story. In fact, I'm trying to look in my review here to see what I maybe didn't like about it, because to me, again, anthologies are so difficult to do really well. And again, you get one, you're good, but if you get more than one, it's good. And I think my personal favorites is here were The Storm Drain, Empty Casket, and Terror. And The Subject was one where I was like, this is fine, it's pretty out there, but I think some of the low budgetness did affect it. And some of the gore in this is just, like, it is so goopy and it is so gross. And VHS has always been known to me for being like one of the more extreme versions of the anthology films, which isn't a necessity, I think, in horror. I think, you can overdo it just as much as you can underdo it. But VHS 94 to me, and again, kudos to Shudder for putting out something like this, which again, it makes sense they would, but I just hope more and more people see this, because it really does sing in every possible way. And again, even while I didn't love the subject, like, it does something that you're not going to see anything else like that. I can almost guarantee it. It's like part Tetsuo, part Titan, which I really didn't enjoy, but that's another conversation. And then part, Hardcore Henry, which again, can be a bit nauseating for some, but I don't know if either of you saw VHS 94.
Yeah, I didn't put it in the 5, but it easily could have been. I'm like, and it's one of those, like you said, every anthology has its weaker parts, but like, when it was over, I was like, were there any weak stories in there? I mean, sure, some are better than the others, but like, if I were to rewatch it right now, would I immediately skip any of the segments? I don't think so. I mean, I think it is the best since the first one, even though I do really like the VHS 2. And I, not just with the cult story, but also the zombie GoPro story, I thought was very effective. But yeah, I mean, you could kind of switch out my top 5 with, or like most of the ones in my top 5 with VHS 4. It's a solid 6. And I mean, that first segment with Ratma, I remember when it was done, I was like, God, that's the first one. That's what that's what they're starting with. I better buckle up.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was great. I want the Blu-ray on my shelf.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. The first segment, of course, was it was just like boom, sort of out of the gate, and I was just like, holy cow. And it's anthologies are really, really hit and miss. If you get one good one, you feel like, oh, okay, well, I'm lucky for that. But this one actually, they really did a great job with. I think that the subject was just sort of like so gory and over the top, and and then the empty wake was sort of like, it sort of reminded me, it had like the same kind of understated tension as what was that, the John Carpenter short, The Gas Station. So I think that overall, I mean, it's as far as anthologies go, I mean, they really managed to like nail it, as like pretty much everyone, and make it all just sort of like, instead of just coming away being like, well, the first one was good or the middle one was good, then it was just sort of like, wow, this overall was actually like really good.
Yeah. I will sing its praises to the day till something better comes along. But now I'm actually really excited for this part, because this is the last part of our discussion, because this is what is the first time watch that you really just loved this year? So Dana, I want to start with you. What's something that just blew your mind that wasn't from 2021?
Oh, well, one that I actually watched recently, and it was a first time watch, and it was was Bloodbeat, from 1983, which you kind of like, when you get into the Christmas season, it's sort of like, what Christmas horror film have I not watched yet? And this this one was a first time watch. I had heard about it, but I hadn't seen it, and the premise alone was just completely bonkers. And then when you go and watch the film, it's completely bonkers. And but I really enjoyed it, because it is so insane. It just like, I think basically, like, the short and the long of it is, this woman goes with her boyfriend to his family's rural Wisconsin home for Christmas, and where a spirit of a Japanese samurai begins to start killing people. It sounds like completely, because there were a lot of Wisconsin samurais, and
as they do.
I mean, that's probably the name of a militia
that cheddar, all that cheese,
yeah.
And but what I love about it, it's such a crazy premise. And you would think that, a premise like that, it would just be like, oh, very wink, wink, like, hey, we're kind of being silly. It's not. It's absolutely straight ahead. We are serious with this plot line. We are serious about this, this slasher film. And that's what I kind of love about it, is that they're like, oh no, we're going completely straight faced into this. And it then, when you have that kind of tone to it, it then becomes like this sort of David Lynchian on ayahuasca nightmare kind of thing. It's just so crazy. And but it's a lot of fun to watch, and I'm just sort of like, what the heck is this? Like, apparently the director was on a lot of drugs when he made this film, so it's kind of like, oh, okay. But I do recommend it. It's, of course it's not for everybody, but I just had such a blast watching it.
Your Horror Files episode on this one made me rethink not getting rid of my Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray, because I watched, and I think sometimes you have to get the initial shock of a film out there, so that you can go back and watch it a bit more objectively. But I'm going to go back and rewatch this one. I remember being like, you got to be kidding me, but like at the same time I was like, you got to be kidding me. Okay. Well, Lowell, what's your first time watch of 2020 that just blew your mind?
Speaking of Timo Tejano, I finally saw May the Devil Take You, which is from a few years ago, and it's like an Indonesian Evil Dead, which was the elevator pitch that I kept hearing, but I'm like, I don't know if I want to watch an Evil Dead-like movie from someone who isn't Sam Raimi, because I feel like most people attempt to do that, and they don't really hit that sweet spot. I think Deathgasm is one of those movies that hits that sweet spot. I didn't think I'd find another one, but May the Devil Take You definitely is. It's just gooey and gross, but also like interesting, and like you really feel like it's mostly in one location, but you really feel like you're there with them, with the cast, and you're panicking and wondering what the hell's going on. And I also watched the sequel, which I believe came out this year, and it was good too, but the first one's from a few years ago, and it was just like some solid Indonesian horror. I really dug it.
I need to check this one out. This has escaped me.
Me too.
Well, this was the hardest one for me, honestly. I think it was easy to look at 2021 and try and pick some films, but I think when you think about all the movies we watched that are older, and so I think what I'm going to pick for this one is going to be Seeding of a Ghost, which is one of the Shaw Brothers horror films that came out in the, I think, 80s. Let me just double check the 80s. 83. If you like absolutely bonkers cinema, like the Shaw Brothers horror stuff is just way out there. Like, and again, I mentioned Evil Dead Trap earlier, which would have been in this spot if I hadn't talked about it before. But this is just, I don't know how to explain it, except it has all of the trappings of like all the things that, all of the awfulness of like the characters in a giallo, like people just being awful people, but that's normalized for some reason. And this taxi driver, his wife is raped and killed by some hooligans, and he basically gets a sorcerer to put a hex on these people in order to avenge his wife. But obviously, as we know, hexes never turn out the way they're supposed to. And there's some visuals in this that just are captivating. Like, it's really kind of wild that it came from 83. And I'm region free over here, so I have a really great 88 films Blu-ray of it, but I'm sure you could probably find it by way of the various different streaming services, or just some really good YouTubing. But definitely one to check out if you really enjoy Asian horror cinema. And also, if you just like, Malignant, I think, is a really good gateway drug for people to explore the bonkers aspect of horror. And so if you found that Malignant was like if you never seen anything like it, and you're like, wow, I really want more of something like that that narrative is tracery to everything else, like visuals and absurdity, then Seeding of a Ghost is certainly one to check out, and one I would love to watch with people who haven't seen, just to see the reactions. So yeah. I think that's our list of the year. And again, this has been so much fun. I think we probably are, there's so many films, and I'm glad just to say that nobody mentioned Halloween Kills. I'm sure it's on some top 10s, but
on the 10, not the 5.
If you heard my Halloween Kills episode, then you know why.
Yeah. I tend to agree with you, Dana. And we could probably that's a movie that's been beaten to death by discussion, which is totally fine.
By a woman with a clothes iron. Just hanging out in the background.
Yeah. Evil's discussed tonight. So the memes alone are just that's the best part sometimes of film. But I think we all, again, so Dana, where can people find you on social medias? And social medias, what am I, 87 years old? Social media.
On the social medias.
I'm on the social medias. I'm mostly on Instagram, but I'm also on Twitter at DeadAliveDana. And then, of course, you can catch me on my podcast, The Horror Files, on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Audible.
Lowell, what about you?
At Living Deadpan on Twitter, and at Lowell School, one word, on Instagram.
All right. And you can find me on Instagram at Macabre_Matty. And again, thank you both to Dana and Lowell for taking the time to do this. And, we at Macabre Daily hope you all have a great 2022, and we hope that we can do this again next year, and we have even more great films to talk about. So take care, stay safe, and watch horror movies.